Ladies and gents, this is ML's like Teen Spirit. I've got Umar back with me for the third time. Umar, welcome back.
Lovely to be back again, John.
Good. Umar, thank you for participating and thank you for your support. We talked before about a few topics. You're a data viz expert. You're open for roles, so freelance, perm, and these sorts of things. You have an interesting background that you came from data journalism, and that's how you got into business analytics and BI. And then you even talked to us about sports broadcasting. So there were some of the communication elements that we'd spoke about before. Today, I want to take it more directly about the data visualization side. So I'm happy I met you because I've been looking for someone to talk to me about kind of tips, best practices around data viz, and particularly building of the dashboards. I'm not slamming anybody, but in business, the business dashboards can often be very, very busy and kind of complex. And I wanted to go through with you just like how you approach a build. So what things are you thinking about, and what tips would you have, and so on and so forth. So Umar, let me take you there. You're sat in front of Tableau or Power BI. You're staring at a blank canvas. What do you do next?
What I would usually do is whenever I design a dashboard, one of the first things I would do if I was in a business environment is speak to the stakeholders first, try and understand what their requirements are and try and understand what questions that they want to answer. What I see a lot of with business dashboards is I see a lot of dashboards that are just simply noise, to put it politely. There's just so many charts that it just looks so busy. Whereas we need to really start by understanding what the stakeholder wants first. Once we've got all that information together, that proves the foundation for initially designing a proof of concept, the first draft dashboard, so that when you design the dashboard that goes out live, which is the final build, it's effectively being designed with the stakeholder and the users in mind.
Yeah, it's a good tip. The user-centered design for it is really critical. Good. And what about some like layout tips? So the user said, "Here's what I need, Umar." They're going to give you bullet points on an email, or if you're really slick, maybe you document it yourself and be like, "Yeah, here's the requirements that you gave me." Something like this. How do you take that into like designing thinking about how many what do you call them, views that you need? Like how do you sort of come into the structuring of how many pages will your dashboard have? Like how do you plan for this?
It ultimately depends on the context of the analysis that I want to sort of present, whether I want filters or parameters, but you ultimately have to strike a balance between getting the right amount of interaction and also not distorting the analysis. It's very easy to distort the analysis when you add filters and parameters because it could sort of be interpreted as the stakeholders' agenda being presented. So you have to really be careful and always ask yourself the question, is the filtering or elements I'm using in my dashboard or report answering the questions that my stakeholder wants me to answer? If there isn't, go back to the requirements and then start again. So you've always got to ask yourself, when you're adding those viz elements and you're adding that interactivity and filtering, am I answering the questions that my stakeholder wants from me?
Take me further on this point. So the point of the stakeholder, if there's too many filter options, are you saying that this can provide too much drill down to the point where maybe the data becomes fragile or too small, and that this is a risk? Is that the type of thing you're thinking, where stakeholders maybe drilling beyond their question and going a bit too low? Is this the kind of problem that you're thinking of, or is it something else?
It's probably somewhere in that bracket because you can add too many filters and then you can just drill down too much and then the analysis just becomes completely pointless. So you want to have that perfect balance of filters and parameters so that they get to drill down to the things that they want to view. You can easily go filter overload and it can just lose the whole analysis of your report or dashboard. So that's effectively what I'm trying to say.
Hmm. What about the can you help me on the question of how to think about should it be a filter or should it be like a specific viz? So like a specific type of chart that's pre-filtered. I don't know if it's an easy question to answer, but I've had projects where I've worked on the requirements. So the requirements were we want all these filters. And then I had the next brief, which was, oh, I can't see this data, so I want you to break out all these charts by the different filter elements. So Umar, I had a project where they paid me to build a dashboard, and I was paid again to undo filters but add chart elements. So clearly, there's like a, I don't know, user didn't feel like using the filters or really interacting with the dashboard at all. Do you have any tips or philosophies around kind of how to handle, is it a filter or is it a viz item? Do you have any thoughts on this?
It ultimately goes back to what I said again about having that initial conversation with stakeholders and users first, because ultimately they are going to be the ones that are going to be using the dashboard. Ultimately, I'm going to be there trying to maintain the dashboard and making sure that the data quality is good as it can be. And if it isn't as good, I try and work with the tools that I've got in the best way I can. So I think it's probably a lot of it is just down to working with what you got and also remembering the core purpose of why you built that dashboard or report. That core purpose is to answer the stakeholders' questions that they want from their analysis. And if you're not doing that, you've just wasted millions and thousands of pounds on a dashboard that looks pretty but cannot even solve a simple question.
Yeah, I mean, I wish that case I talked about was millions rather than thousands. Umar, I'd be a rich man if I was getting millions paid in that case. But I see the point. It can be a costly error to drift off the requirements. So I think the tip you've got there is make sure you're staying in touch with the requirements and the stakeholder. Um, in every business development, it's very possible for there to, we call it drift. Like scope creeps. Like things start to change as something becomes developed. People are like, oh, hey, what about this? So this gives you extra things to do, extra things to work on that you weren't expected. But sometimes you're taken away from what was that initial set of questions that were on the requirements. So um, in my experience, it's okay to move off the requirements and develop further. It's just that the stakeholders need to recognise that it's more time. This will take longer now that you've changed it. And if everyone is cool with that, then so be it. Umar, you've been getting into this, coming into the BI world from your data journalism background. Um, take us through the tools briefly, like maybe pros and cons, because you've been like learning everything, applying yourself to the big platforms. Take us through like the big players in the BI space, and could you just do pros and cons for me as you see it? So, what are some of the big platforms you can use for dashboarding? And tell me the good bit, something good and something bad about each one. Let's pick three.
So in my experience, the tools that I've mainly used for dashboarding, I've only used two, so that's Tableau and Power BI.
Yeah.
And Tableau is a Salesforce related sort of tool. Power BI, of course, is Microsoft. And Tableau is really good because it runs on custom SQL infrastructure. So you can easily run SQL queries within your data set that you've loaded into Tableau. Whereas Power BI is run on DAX, which is data analysis expressions. So they're run on very different architecture, Tableau and Power BI. Tableau is really good at building drag and drop dashboards and analysis. PBI is more of a reporting tool. So whenever they whenever the tools are sort of almost discussed in tandem, I would say Tableau is a BI tool where you can just easily learn it from word go. Power BI, you need to have a bit more understanding of DAX and data modeling to ensure that whatever you present in your data model is as accurate as it can be so that the report isn't throwing up errors or inaccurate analysis. And I would say in terms of the pros and cons, Tableau is really easy to get into. I would probably say Tableau and PBI are both easy to get into. I'd probably say one of the cons with Power BI is you kind of have to learn data modeling to a good extent to be able to really exploit the full potential of DAX. And Tableau's probably, and the biggest con of Tableau is it's run on a flat file, so it's run in a table structure, so it can run tall or wide with the data set. So there are lots of pros and cons between both tools, although I have used Tableau for nearly a decade and I do prefer it, although Power BI is closely becoming a my favorite, my other favorite tool to use alongside Tableau. So a lot of them do work hand in hand with each other to get the best possible outcomes that you can get with your analysis.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I just had a call earlier when I was saying like Power BI is a great one to start on because of that the Power Query backend and the way that you have to do structuring of data before you even do the viz. That forces you to think about what data do I have here. So it's like instead of going straight to the solution, you think about the input. That's what I was telling this person. We did get onto DAX, Umar. And like Umar, I've been a coder for 20 years, and I must admit that DAX has nearly made me cry more than once. So it's like it's an interesting coding language. It kind of doesn't really look like anything else. So it's I suppose it's got a learning curve, and that you need to practice before you get into those really custom calculations or transformations and these things. Okay, Umar. So I'm hearing like a little bit about the tools that work in this space. I heard a lot about the gathering of requirements and answering the stakeholders' questions and staying very firm on this is a good way to navigate a build project. Help me out with the downsides. Like, what are one or two like frequent mistakes that you think or traps that people fall into when they're building dashboards? Like, what do you seek to avoid?
Failing to tell a clear story is probably one of them. If you're just building a dashboard that doesn't have any story, your stakeholders are going to switch off. It's pretty obvious. If you don't have a story, you may as well throw your dashboard or a report in the bin.
Yeah.
And also creating charts that are misleading. And I am talking about pie charts and donut charts, of course. Whenever you do part to whole charts, you should always make sure that it adds up to 100% and you're using as few fields as possible. And I see this a lot where they use pie charts in the most incorrect way possible, where they have multiple segments in the pie or the donut. And I just look at it and I just think, you haven't really learned anything. So I probably would say it's failing to tell a clear story and also choosing charts that are misleading or doing it in the incorrect way.
Tell me more about the pie charts. People either love them or hate them. So what are the limitations of these?
Pie charts are really good at showing part to whole sort of proportions of a chart, so it needs to add up to 100%. I like pie charts and also donut charts, but as humans, we are naturally attracted to circles, which is why whenever you see any data viz or dashboard, the chances are you're more than likely to see a pie chart or a donut chart in some form. So pie charts are so easy to get wrong, and I think a little bit of caution is required so that whenever you present any sort of data in a pie chart or a donut chart, all the segments add up to 100%.
Got it. So thinking about your inputs and data quality and so on and so forth is a good tip on these ones. Good, Umar. Well, look, that's everything. So the storytelling element, not misleading visualizations, staying close to the stakeholder requirements, all key tips in here. And you went through some of the tools. It seems like most folk these days manage both, don't they? In old times, you'd be Tableau or these days, I think being able to work with both those platforms is a good shout. So thanks for taking us through that, Umar. And thank you for your insights on the topic. Ladies and gents, this has been ML's Like Teen Spirit.